Welcome everyone, welcome back from the break. Looks like we've lost a lot of people, so the dessert must be very good outside. I didn't get out there, so I must have make a chance, hopefully they've left some. It's amazing to be here, and for me, connecting is like my equivalent of Christmas. I was excited the night before, I had my gear laid out, what am I going to wear? Ironed my shirt the night before, so it really is a treat to be here. We've just had a break, everyone's either had a little bit of a sugar kick, hopefully everyone's had a little bit of caffeine. What I want you to do, and Hari mentioned this at the start, part of what's great about getting talent acquisition professionals together is actually to meet and build relationships. Now, there's a couple of gaps here while people are making their way back in. But what I want you to do is I want to look at this image that you can see up here on the screen. I want you to introduce yourself to the person who's either closest to you or next to you or behind you and have a quick 30-second, 40-second think as to what the hell you think this image might be. The time is yours. Some creative thinking here. I'm talking about people and arrows, there's movement, the language is increased. So I'll let you in a little secret. So this visual, we're very passionate about this little exercise, it's wonderful. I'll let you know what this is. So this is actually a recruitment advertisement. In the day when the choice of recruitment advertising was print, and when you look at this advertisement, you start to think to yourself, okay, it's very difficult to decipher who are they communicating to. There's people here who speak multiple languages. Perhaps some of these characters you have or haven't seen before. I'll let you in a little secret. The characters that you might see is, there's hundreds of different types of font in Microsoft Office. One of the fonts that is there is a font called Wingdings or Wingdongs. Some of you may be familiar. I'm familiar with those fonts when I'm not really looking at my screen. I'm just pressing. I've accidentally pressed another button. I've realized the whole paragraph is interpretable. So when you think to yourself, okay, that's the font. Who could possibly understand what that font is? And then you think of the actual type of job that might use fonts and might specialize in that area. That area of expertise is called a typographer. And this is actually an advertisement by an advertising agency from Amsterdam talking about a career opportunity as a typographer within their design agency. This advertisement was placed in a very unique boutique design magazine, specifically knowing that that's the type of audience who that would get the cut through and would see this. So what the message here is really is that today the way you communicate is something that you need to really start to consider, how people see your organisation. And if you look at this advertisement, it actually speaks volumes about the company without really even understanding as to what it is able to say. It instantly says to me, innovative, the type of environment perhaps that you can be really truly creative, that actually empowers people to think differently and approach problems from a different angle. And so how do you position yourself? How do you position your brand? What's the way you communicate about your organisation is really at the heart of what I'm here to talk to you about today. We've had some amazing speakers today, and I think I really enjoyed a lot of what the panel were talking about, in particular the opening comments Simon made at the start, where he created an incredible scenario. 200 people, et cetera, needed to happen really quickly. And you'd start to think of that opportunity, you think, who would be positioned today to start to really tackle that talent acquisition challenge that the business is facing? And when you start to look holistically about how talent acquisition is changing, what you often see is at the heart of where a lot of organisations historically still are today is very much rooted to this reactive, focused, transactionally based, quantity versus quality kind of proposition that historically talent acquisition has been known for. And what's happening with change, and one of the comments Lee made that I think was really on the money, is when you think about fundamental change, business change to create competitive advantage, it really starts around people, process and technology. And so this visualization of the journey organisations are going on is to start to move from a reactive environment to a proactive environment of talent. In a situation where you understand the markets that you compete in, understand who are the competitors that you are fighting for, this notion of the war for talent. And how do you start to build future relationships and build pipelines of talent so you understand and are engaged with the right type of people? Because what we do know and what's been reiterated time and time again is that competitive advantage comes from quality talent. And today, and the proposition on LinkedIn and the proposition around what we determine as social media is enabling people to fast track their transition from a reactive state of recruitment into thought leaders, into a strategic proposition to be proactively engage talent and add value, contribute value back to the business. And LinkedIn's transforming how businesses are progressing through this line and start to move away from focusing on people, but focusing on talent. And, it's interesting, Hari, at the opening, he spoke really well about this notion of a passive candidate and the difference between a passive and active candidate. But let's talk a little bit further about actually candidates, or in particular, our members on LinkedIn. What you understand and what we need to start to think about when you start to transform your organisation, when you look to create competitive advantage, is we have to understand that the candidates or the members today that you want to recruit and acquire and bring into your business are different from the members or candidates historically that you've looked to engage because they're more informed. Technology's enabled our people to be more informed about the decisions we make. You think about our buying decisions when we look as consumers of whether it be the car or the travel or the photography equipment we want to buy. We research things to make sure that we're making the right decisions. And candidates and our members are doing that today. They're more informed than they ever have been. And they have more empowered to influence their career trajectory because of the access to information that historically wasn't available. And so when we think about change within an organisation, we have to think about how the member or your candidates have changed as well and how informed they are. And how do you participate and influence them so they understand the career opportunities that exist within your organisation. And so the very building blocks that are at the harness that is really around these notions that got developed in sort of really around the middle of 2005, the Corporate Leadership Council developed this notion of an employee value proposition. We're familiar with these notions, and then how do you articulate that as a form of your employer brand? These simply are the building blocks to help you actually start to articulate your story. What we're talking about here is storytelling, right? Organisations today, when they want to start controlling the talent that comes into the organisation, need to start to control the way they tell the story, both internally and externally. Why would someone join your organisation? What is unique about your organisation? And more importantly, how do we articulate that proposition both internally and externally? And for those who aren't sure of how well you tell the story, I encourage you to do a little exercise when you go back to your offices. Talk to 5 of your hiring managers and ask them to articulate in 2 minutes an elevator pitch as to why someone should work within their team or for the company that you work for, and see how consistent those stories are. See what attributes they highlight or they don't highlight. And that can give you a sense as to how consistent that story is being told within your organisation. And so what we know is that a company's employer brand is not as effective as an employer brand, right? There are 2 different propositions. In fact, the data that we have from a survey we ran last year shows a company's employer brand is twice as likely to drive job consideration. I was working recently with a very large energy company, an incredibly well-known brand you would be familiar with. And when I worked with their HR leadership team, when I asked them some of the challenges they're facing in acquiring quality talent, one of the ladies put her hand up and said, I look after the sales and marketing area. We cannot get sales and marketing professionals into our organisation. We are misunderstood in the market. We are not top of mind. People think of FMCG. They think of finance. They don't think of us as in the energy sector. They don't know what they would do within our company, even though we're a well-known brand. It's a very good example where they've got a challenge within that market, that labour segment that they recruit, because they lack awareness. How do they elevate that, and how do they educate the people to understand, to achieve attracting quality talent? So we talked about those building blocks. We understand that. But what I want to introduce you today, and one of the things, a term that you'll start to hear more and more of here at LinkedIn, is there's actually a third part now with the evolution and the transformation LinkedIn is having on the way people attract and engage quality talent. And that is a notion of a talent brand. There's a new extension of how you communicate and how people are making decisions. Simply put, if I think of an employer brand as a message you would tell a candidate during an interview, I would tell you who we are and why we're a great company and why you should join us. When you leave that room or when that candidate leaves and moves on, what they tell, the story they tell about the organisation or their experience, that is their talent brand. And so talent brand is the highly social, totally public version of your employer brand, incorporating what talent thinks, feels and shares about your company. And how you start to think about that is really critical, because some other data points that I've read is 47% of workers say that a company's online reputation matters as much as their job offer. How that candidate is making decisions, how that candidate is being more informed is critical to the way they're making a decision to whether they should join your organisation. And so holistically, some of the things we're going to talk about in just a moment is how do you start to influence that talent brand? How do you start to have control and influence about how people understand and engage with you to potentially come and work for your organisation. And within LinkedIn, there's some things that are within your control, but there's certain elements that are out of your control. But it's important that you start to participate and influence to start to perhaps change perceptions or perhaps educate people more about that career opportunity. And so with that, I would like to welcome Sarah Garvey from Standard Chartered to actually talk about some of the steps that she's making and some of the changes that made in Standard Chartered to actually influence their talent brand. Please welcome Sarah. Welcome to Connect In, Sarah.
Thank you.
We had Lee talk earlier, and everyone here is obviously familiar with the brand. When we talk about the company brand versus the employer brand, one would perhaps think, without knowing, that Standard Chartered perhaps don't need to do anything around their employer brand. I mean, why would a bank of your size, with your reputation, need to invest in leveraging that or developing that?
I think any employer needs to invest in their employer brand for a variety of different reasons, actually. It's competitive out there. We've all heard the phrase war for talent. It's been hanging around for a long time. It hasn't changed. There's decreasing loyalty, increasing demands in the workplace. Jobs are more demanding than ever. People are more likely to change jobs than ever before. And, they want more out of their job than they have in the past. It's not only about a pay packet now, but it's about those higher order needs around, belonging and a sense of purpose. So, we need to remain competitive, and your employer brand is a key component in that. I think the other thing is you can't rely on your corporate brand, to convey what you offer as an employer. The two, your employer brand and your corporate brand should be well aligned, but your corporate brand doesn't always convey what you offer and what you expect in return. It doesn't. You need a strong employer brand that conveys all of those different things so that it allows the right people to opt in and join your company, and it allows the wrong people to take a step back and say, perhaps that's not the company for me. And I think thirdly, it's really about explaining why. In the past, companies have really focused on selling a career or a role with the company based on attributes, like we've got this many people, we operate in this many countries, we sell these kinds of products and services, but that doesn't, to my earlier point about higher order needs and a sense of belonging and purpose, it doesn't allow me to connect with the company in a way that's meaningful to me. I want to believe in what I do. I want to believe in what that company does, and I want to help them drive that kind of growth. So that's a really important element.
It's, I think, the people up on the panel before were talking a lot about business cases and how do you actually articulate the value and the reason to do something. And often one of the challenges within organisations is HR see the need to develop an employer brand because HR is as actually Lee said, was at the forefront and the front of that. When you start to think about the business drivers and the value, what made you reflect on the need to invest time to start to articulate that story?
I think, well, to the panel's earlier point around direct sourcing, a strong employer brand is really critical to a direct sourcing effort. You need to arm all of your recruiters, your line managers, et cetera, with that positioning and that messaging and explain your employer brand and what you have to offer. So that's a critical tool. Growth is a key driver and need for an employer brand as well. Standard Chartered particularly is a growing company, and we're growing in really dynamic markets. So it's important that we have an employer brand that's going to fuel that growth. And like I said, around passive candidates as much as active candidates, probably more so focused on passive candidates. I think differentiation is also important for us. I think it's a problem in many industries, but particularly in banking. You line banks up, they can all start to look very, very similar. It's the blue and green bank next to the blue bank, next to the red bank, next to the black and white bank. And how do we differentiate ourselves in the minds of candidates? So an employer brand will really help you to articulate that differentiation very clearly. I think purpose as well. It's an interesting one in the context of where we're at today. The financial crisis, I think a lot of people start to call into question what's the value and purpose of banks and banking in general? What value do they add, and what are they here to do? So a strong employer brand can also help you create that value and purpose. And I talked about having people believe in what you believe in and help you to fuel and drive that growth, and that's what an employer brand is about. And to the point you made earlier, your brand is going to be shaped with or without you. So people are having these conversations at barbecues, online, social media, etc. You might as well get actively involved in that conversation and help shape your employer brand in the right way, and not just let that evolve for you. So
yeah, I think what's interesting there is you mentioned the word growth, and sometimes people think, oh, well, just because we're growing, therefore we need to invest in developing our brand story. But similarly, you could be a company that's going through transformation, such change that there might be not exactly a positive period, but it's important to still get quality talent in to actually help to be part of that change and move you into that next layer. You know, when you talked about growth, are there pockets within the bank that perhaps are experiencing different challenges that were just as important to start to identify? Like, is it harder to get people in Africa, for example, than it may be here in Singapore, for example?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, we have different areas of growth in different parts of the bank in different regions. It's about getting the right people in the right jobs at the right time. So I'll go to segmenting and making sure that you've got messages that are well aligned to the people that you're trying to attract. So it's all very well and good to have an employer brand that talks generically to who you are and what you offer. But if you really want to go after the right people in the right roles at the right time, you need to get very targeted and very specific quite quickly, so that you're talking to them in a way that's meaningful to them and that they can engage with you on that level.
Yeah, and I think one of the advice I can give there as well is that when you start talking about messaging as part of those drivers, but one of the questions I've asked is, well, what should we say about our company? Well, it should be 80% should be based on reality, 20% should be based on aspiration. So you want to make sure that when you're communicating that proposition, that story, that it's equivalent of the experience that they're going to get within that organisation. You know, one of the challenges that a lot of organisations have retention issues is often during the process when they're actually acquiring or bringing someone into the organisation, they were told multiple stories and some weren't based on truth. And that's often, and you often, you know, been in environments where someone said, gosh, I was told I was going to get this, or I was told that this is how things would happen, and the business is not able to deliver on that. And that's when I keep talking about the lack of consistency within which how that story has been told. Just
to further to that point, I think your employer brand's important in attracting the right talent to your organisation, but it's also really important in retaining the talent that you have. So you need to ensure that your employer brand is consistent throughout the employee life cycle, that it's not just focused on the attraction elements, that it's actually running a red thread through everything that you do with your people.
Just on that, I think, you know, when you started to think about that brand and the brand drivers, how did you communicate that back internally? Was that something that is challenging, or is that?
Look, I think it's challenging in every respect. I think you've got a lot of people that you need to communicate with and who need to understand your brand and who you are and what you have to offer. You have your recruiters who are, you know, the front line, if you like. But ultimately, you know, as you're moving candidates through the process, they're engaging with a lot of different people throughout your organisation, and you need to ensure that everybody's aligned in their messaging so that the candidate's getting one perspective about who you are and what you have to offer, not 4 or 5, even more different perspectives. So it is challenging to engage, but it's also essential.
When you start to think, and one of the interesting things is a lot of organisations, certainly through the middle of the 2000s, sort of went, oh, we developed an EVP, we developed an employer brand, we'll tick that box, oh, we've done, nothing more to do, and then they've just gone back to that transactional kind of state I've spoken about. What I respect so much about your organisation is really taking that proactive approach to leverage and utilise and to build that talent brand. Can you share with us why you saw LinkedIn as a channel partner to help execute that?
I'll do a little bit of LinkedIn PR here for you. I mean, look, Harry kind of hit it, you know, in his opening speech. It's about passive candidates. The right people aren't always the people who are searching for the jobs, who are out there actively looking. So, you know, where else can you engage with such a massive, I'm going to rhyme now, a massive passive candidate audience?
Yeah, massive passive, we'll take that. Massive passive. Sounds like we're a rapper.
The other one would be just the sheer numbers, you know, 225 million professionals on LinkedIn, you know, and 2 new professionals every second. That's just phenomenal. Again, what a huge network. I think the other thing for us is the footprint. Though LinkedIn started in the US, they're growing in the countries and the geographies that we're growing. So that's really important to us, that their growth is kind of following a similar pattern to ourselves.
Thanks for that, Seth. I think, you know, when you start to actually then go through a process, like how do you then to build that? And one of the things that we heard a bit on the panel, and something I've always a big believer in, is, you know, working on a phased approach, you know, strategizing what can we achieve in this specific period of time. Can you share with us how you approach, you know, influencing your talent brand on LinkedIn and the steps you went through?
It's a journey that's not finished, and I don't think it will ever be finished, by the way, but I'll give you kind of some insights into what we did and how we went about it. First of all, I think it's about just getting the basics in place. You know, you can get your company page up and running, you can get your careers page up and running, and they're the fundamentals. You need those before you do anything else. I think then, you know, our second step to my earlier point around segmentation was to look at how can we talk to specific candidates or specific audiences in a way that's meaningful to them. So we went down the route of, you know, segmenting by geography, and we now have 18 separate careers pages up that target candidates by geography. I think we've maxed out the geographies that we can possibly go through on LinkedIn that kind of reflect our footprint. But we're also now starting to look at different talent segments, so audiences like graduates or, you know, specific skill sets within the organisation that we're really going after. And then also language targeting is really important to us as well. In our junior talent segments, English may not be their first language, but they're still a really important audience for us, so how do we target them? And that's through language targeting. So we're starting to build pages in I think, Korean, Bahasa Indonesia, and Bahasa Malay as well. So once you've got your company page, your careers pages set up, and you've done a little bit of segmenting and talking to specific audiences, what's your call to action? You need to make sure that you're actually asking them to do something. Don't get people excited about your brand and what your company has to offer and then leave them hanging. You've got to give them something to do. So this is really about, for us, this was about jobs, getting your jobs up there and loading your jobs and getting people's eyes across those jobs, so they can see where they fit in your organisation and how they might contribute. I think fourth for us, so these kind of things happen concurrently in some respects, but once you've got all those basics in place, your careers pages, your company pages, your segmenting, you've now got your jobs up and running, start to drive traffic. And the LinkedIn team will be able to explain traffic drivers far more eloquently than I ever will. However, what they ultimately do is they get eyes across your pages and across your jobs. So start to drive that traffic using the traffic drivers that are available. And there's a range of them, and it's about optimizing and making sure that they're working in the best way for you. Then it's about, you know, and this is a journey we're still on, just embedding LinkedIn in everyday practices and processes. So for instance, adding things like follow and share buttons to the careers pages on your website. Embedding LinkedIn in your hiring processes, so enabling apply through LinkedIn or those kinds of things to make it really easy for candidates to apply for roles. And then, you know, just explore, experiment and test. The LinkedIn product teams are always developing new products. There's a lot of things that we haven't used to date that we're testing out for different challenges that we're facing, etc. So just explore, experiment, test, see what works for you in different places and against different challenges.
Yeah, I think one of the things I want to pick up there and just highlight is that often when people start to think about, well, what is our talent brand strategy? How do we start to actively influence the passive talent that to help them get a better understanding of who we are? And one of the things that what Sarah's just shared that I want to just underline is that you need to think about your business and think, what are the critical talent segments that are most important to our business? So if we think about our business priorities, if we think about our workforce plans, what are the areas that bringing in the right level of talent are going to have critical impact to the business success? And you might look at your business, and I can think of, if I think of LinkedIn as an example, for that it would be engineering and sales would be the two labour segments really critical to our business. And so you think about your organisation, and then you want to start to proactively think about how do we elevate and personalise our story to those labour segments so they can start to understand more about our organisation. And really what you're saying, I think, really well is that with a long-term view. And so when we talk about moving from reactive to proactive recruitment, we're not focused on the now, those 10 recs I've got to fill today. We're thinking about the future. We're thinking about the key business segments that are going to be critical to our innovation, our growth, sustainability, productivity, etc. How do we actually socialise ahead of the curve, help them build long-term relationships and understand our brand, so as and when we have the right career opportunities, they're already ready, they're already understanding, they're already open to coming to work for us. And so when Sarah talks about segmenting, when she talks about personalising the experience, you have to think differently about the passive candidate. On a platform like LinkedIn, that person may not be actively open to a new career change, but they may see the job that Sarah spoke about, and with a click of a button, they're wanting a bit more information. You know, I had lunch once with a friend of mine, and he was a pure active candidate, other way, he was a passive candidate. He ran his own business and was bought out as an executive leader of a financial planning company. But when he was on LinkedIn, he saw a job and he said it was like it was written for me. And right there, we want to capture that interest and engage that person, that member, with the right information. And that's what how many career pages did you say you have?
In total, we have 21 at the moment.
So 21. So what that means is there's 21 different experiences as and when a member goes to the Standard Chartered careers page, they will be seeing information relevant to them. You're a sales professional, here's sales information. You're an engineer, here's engineering information. And that's how we heighten the engagement for a passive candidate to get more information and change their mind to be open to future career opportunities. You know, when you think about, you know, a lot of people here might be saying, someone made a question before, you're a large organisation, of course you can do all these things, we may be small, 100 people. I'm interested to understand the type of support you've had to execute and bring this to life. Can you give us a little insight to the day in the life of Sarah?
We don't have a huge team to do all of this, and I think I'll share it with you in my lessons learned, but sorry. You know, it's just about kind of getting in there and starting to get something done. So we don't have a huge team around this. It's me and at the time one other person who was just helping me get it done, and it was part of BAU activity. It was something that we were working on continuously. I think other support that we had, so that was kind of the team that was focused on it, and like I said, part of a range of different things we were doing at the time, so not a full-time role for anyone. I think the support really comes from the team at LinkedIn. They know what they're doing. We asked a lot of questions, we asked for feedback, we gave feedback, and we just worked on it in partnership. We also work with a couple of different areas within the organisation as well. So we have an online comms team who are responsible for our social media strategy. We needed to engage them and get their buy-in and support. We have a public websites team. You know, they do all of our website, you know, and can help embed LinkedIn. So we were really looking to engage the people within the organisation. I think one of the teams of people who are really important to us is it's all very well and good for me to sit here in Singapore and be responsible for managing our brand on LinkedIn, but I don't know what's happening on the ground in Ghana, or how we want to present, you know, Standard Chartered in Ghana to the audience out there, or Malaysia, or, you know, what's happening in the relationship manager space. So I need to actively engage people within our network that have that knowledge and can help me develop an understanding of those different segments and engage them in a way, like I said, that is really meaningful for them. I think the other support that you really do need is if you're looking to build a professional talent brand on LinkedIn, you do need to engage agency support just to really amp it up and you know, look great.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I think I took away from the panel, where I think is pertinent here as well, is when you start to think about actively bringing that brand to life. And sometimes HR is often operating in isolation, so they might not have marketing support, they might not have internal comms support, but they know it's important initiative to help be better at what you do and change the positioning of talent acquisition in the organisation. And I think the other comment from the panel, which I think is really on the mark here, is identify that sponsor, you know, might be that hiring manager who you know is challenged with a bit of retention, or is challenged from bringing the lack of quality into their organisation, and it's something they're passionate about. And so helping them articulate their story and bring that together as a starting point is often what we see happening. And that's back to the tiered movement of moving from a traditional through to a strategic. Sometimes happens in tiers because it's about getting small wins, educating, reinforcing, and then going back out to market with those wins to broaden your reach and broaden your impact. I think that, you know, you mentioned lessons learned, and I think the notion of social is new. The notion of, you know, even here in Singapore, we mentioned only a short period of time, the impact organisations are having with their platform. Are you able to share some lessons learned from your experience?
A lot of lessons learned, I think, from our perspective. Some of these things, I think we did well. Some of the things we didn't do well at all, and I think some of it's also just common sense. So I think starting with explaining why to your stakeholders. I mentioned our online comms team who are responsible for our social media presence. So they look at social media in a totally different, you know, through a totally different lens than we do. We're looking social recruiting, they're looking at, you know, engaging conversations and those kinds of things. They didn't understand for a minute what we were trying to achieve. And it wasn't, we didn't have this real aha moment until much later in the process. We were kind of just butting heads and, you know, not really getting the traction that we wanted. So explaining why you're doing what you're doing to the right people up front is really important. And like I said, that's common sense, but it didn't occur to us until a bit later they're now fully supportive, and anytime we mention LinkedIn to them, they're all over it and at pains to help us. So, which is great.
And just on that, was that important with those stakeholders as soon as you started to have a milestone or a quick win to go back and share with them and bring them along for the journey, or was it just a matter of course that happened?
No, it was really around building the business case. So why, as a talent acquisition team, was LinkedIn important to us? How were we going to use LinkedIn, and why was that an important channel? They didn't, like I said, they were focused on social from an engagement, building conversations, relationships point of view, and didn't see it as a recruiting tool, didn't really understand it as a recruiting tool. So it was about building the business case with them primarily, and demonstrating the quick wins, the wins that we were getting as we were getting them. So that was important. I think the second lesson learned is just owning it. This is common sense, but just assign accountability, responsibility for developing your talent brand on LinkedIn to one person and make it happen. If they're responsible for it, it's part of their objectives, it'll get done, and quickly. That person ended up being me. Yeah. Just start somewhere. I think when I first started to get across LinkedIn, I was a little bit paralysed. There was so much to learn, in a relatively short space of time, and I wanted to perfect and really understand everything there was to know about LinkedIn. And that's just not possible. Like I said, it's ever changing. So just jump in, start somewhere, get your careers page up and running, or get your company page up and running, and it will start to move from there, in partnership with the LinkedIn team, of course. To my earlier point around support and resources, it's just about investing time and regularly. Like I said, this is not a full-time job, but it requires constant care and attention, and just making sure that you've got that at the back of your mind in everything that you do, and connecting the dots with other activities that you're doing that don't involve LinkedIn. How can you leverage LinkedIn in those activities? Planning ahead is really important. This is in relation probably to things like traffic drivers and thinking about, right, what talent segments do I need to target, what time of year, what campaigns am I going to be doing, and how can I book those in and get those plans done. Something that we weren't particularly good at in the first year, but we're getting better and better at each year.
And I'll just make another point there. I think, historically, when you look at the culture of a lot of organisations within talent acquisition, by nature, the business is reactive, because often talent acquisition sometimes is not abreast of some of the business changes. I remember one example. I worked with a very large retail organisation, and she sort of rang at 6 o'clock at night and said, we need to get 80 people in merchandise, managers ASAP. The business is right onto us. We're opening up 8 new stores. And I was like, wow, I mean, of course we can help here, but, and this is in a previous life, but I was like, surely, how can we just find out today? Why couldn't we have this discussion 3 months ago? We could have done a lot of pre-planning. We could have built some deeper relationships, etc. And her comment was, the business just told me today. And so, it happens in a lot of organisations. How did talent acquisition be more of a business partner and start to be aware of some of those things? And that's where we're starting to see organisations who are able to use the platform and use the data that the guys spoke about to actually influence and educate the hiring managers, start to become and have a seat around at the table, but more importantly, be aware of the change that's coming. And more importantly, start to then plan and say, right, we're opening up 8 stores. Just tell me, I understand the type of people we might need. How do we start to elevate and proactively educate the market, not only what's happening within our organisation, but the career opportunities that we could be coming to ultimately attract and engage a better quality talent.
I think getting your jobs up quickly is really important. Again, it sounds obvious, but for us, when we started this journey, we probably had about 25,000 followers. 18 months later, we're up at about 150,000, close to 150,000. And that really took off when we got our jobs up. So people were engaging with us previously, but it grew exponentially once we got our jobs up and running. And that leads me into my next point around just automate, automate, automate. Don't rely on individuals to post the jobs up to your website where you can. Just make it happen for them, because something always gets in the way. So just automate it, get that feed up, and remove it from their responsibility. Measurement's important. Getting your measurement right from the start is really important, but I'll counter that with don't let it paralyse you either. So if you spend so much time trying to get your measurements sorted from the get-go that you don't do anything, that's not a good outcome either. So balance that, but getting measurement right from the start is going to help you demonstrate the ROI and get further investment and commitment from the business as well. And then it's just, I suppose, changes, it's happening. Convergence in the social space is happening. Just try and stay ahead of it. Figure out what the next trend is going to be and stay ahead of it.
Yeah, and once again, just to double click on one of those comments, I think, jobs are often one of the first most tactical ways someone might even have a first level of engagement with your brand. That could be the call to action. The role looks perfect. The uniqueness of LinkedIn, of course, is the algorithm is able to serve up jobs exactly in line with the person's professional identity. So for that moment, they see a job in line with their background, that click of that button, they want to have that right information. And that's where you're able to create that call to action and give them that more information to have that comfort level that it could be the right company. You know, and a very simple analogy is that if you think of the retail environment, when you're walking through here in, is it Orchard Road? Is that the big shopping centre? I'm up at the shops. You know, when you're walking through that mall, you might see that window, those images, those products that catch your eye and drive you to go into that shop. That's really what's happening on the platform if you think about it. And so your job's a really important element of your talent brand story.
Can't agree enough.
You know, when you think back of the journey, and I had the good fortune to meet you probably at the start of that journey, you know, 18 months ago probably now. You know, when you look at where the business has come to today, what perhaps surprised you most about what you've been able to achieve?
I think what surprised me most once I got going is that it really wasn't that hard in the end. You know, so to my point about just get on with it. It's not that hard, and you've got to start somewhere, and it needs to be done. So, you know, that was it. The success that we managed quite early on, I shouldn't say it surprised me. We put a lot of work and effort into it, but we were really pleased with the results that we were able to gain from doing what we've done. So I think they're probably the two big takeaways for me.
You mentioned measuring before, and it's come up. Of course, the Insight team talked about measure. The panel talked about return on investment and business case. You know, how do you measure success along this journey, and what does that mean to your organisation?
I think you can measure in a lot of different ways. It depends how sophisticated you want to get. There's simple data points available to you, like your follower numbers, you know, the number of visits to your careers pages, the number of unique visits, the page views, those kinds of things. Source tracking, so your applicant source tracking, those kinds of things. They're data points, really important to capture. But to a point that Lee on the panel made earlier around, you know, getting to that next level of understanding, that next level of insight and therefore action is really important as well. So he made brought up the example of if you can understand which channels deliver the candidates that are going to hang around the longest and drive the best performance, then that's real insight. So where you can start to connect those data sets and get real insight, that's kind of the next level, and something that we're starting to work on. I think other things that we look at, the Talent Brand Index has been a real driver for us, so making sure that we continue to fuel that. So we got our first reading last year. It was almost double that of our closest peers, which we were really proud of, but that's something that requires continual work, and we will continue to drive that. We also capture voice of customer feedback as well, so throughout the process around our brand and, you know, and how well engaged with it people are, so that's really important as well. So there's a number of different measures. It just depends on how sophisticated you want to get. Start with basic data, but if you can shift to, you know, insights and analytics and really understanding the value that these channels are driving, that's the next level to kind of aspire to, I think.
And this is more of a personal question, I suppose, but when you think of your own, you know, we measure ourselves every day on the work that we do, the impact we individually have in our jobs. You know, we often lose sight of that when we ask those questions, but certainly my experience when I talk to talent acquisition leaders is sometimes the changes they've had within the organisation from the LinkedIn solution has actually transformed their own careers. Just any personal sharing there from your own experience and what you've learned from that?
Yeah, look, I think I'm always cognizant of the value that we're adding to the business. You know, the panel talked about it earlier. We need to drive value with the business, and that's really around return on investment. So how are we decreasing the cost per hire, et cetera? But we also need to make sure that the business has a long-term view as well. So how are we developing our talent brand with that passive audience to make hiring easier down the track? So I tend to look at it from two different points of view. The shorter term ROI, making sure that we're going to continue to get investment and drive growth in these channels, but also the long-term view as well. How are we building our brand so that further down the track it's going to be easier for us as we continue that growth.
Yeah, and here's one question, and if it's business sensitive, you don't need to answer it, but you know, when you talk about the diversity of the bank, and you talk about the geographical reach that the bank has, and you talk about success, you know, are you seeing any changes, I mean, from the activity and the engagement of the members, or whether is it helped Africa, or, you know, is there anything that you could share just when you look at the segments that you've identified? Or
yeah, look, I think I mentioned before that LinkedIn's growth is kind of in similar areas to our own. Africa is a really great point. We were over there recently talking with our team, and LinkedIn is growing massively in Africa, and they see it as a really important tool for them. So no assumptions about where or how LinkedIn can help us. I think it can help us in many different areas. We operate in 77 countries. We've got hundreds of different nationalities. I can't even imagine the number of roles that we recruit for. So, you know, LinkedIn can help us in all of those areas.
Yeah, terrific. One of the things, you know, that we've spoken about today is really a process, an approach to start thinking about how do you actively not only develop but leverage a talent brand to create, you know, future opportunities for passive candidates. One of the things that we're proud of today to be able to launch, and this is within everyone's black bag there, is what we call our employer brand playbook. And so this is really you know, I'm really proud of the approach the company's taken on this. We've really taken the time to do a lot of research to understand what are the 4 to 5 steps of success for an organisation to start to achieve some of these initiatives that we've covered here today. Right from the moment of how do you start to get buy-in, what are the steps you need to think about to start to socialise and leverage the stakeholders that Sarah mentioned. And more importantly, when I talked about the consistency of the message within the organisation. So a term that's often referred to as building the brand from the inside out. What do your people who already work for your organisation think, and how do they talk about your organisation? How do you get that information to make sure that the attributes that you're focusing on, and ultimately when you look at segmenting and communicating beyond the active candidate, what are the messages that you want me to say that's based on 80% truth and 20% aspiration? And then how do you craft that approach? So Sarah mentioned that really well, talking about, hey, this is who we are, but we've got a different message for the people in Africa than we may do for the people here in, say, in Malaysia or Singapore. Or we know that the salespeople are going to be different from the relationship bankers. What are the key attributes that we need to think about, and what sort of stories do we tell them to start building and influencing those labour segments? And then how do we start to take that proactive approach? How do we really start to actively promote and engage and build those long-term relationships? And today we've talked about things like company status updates. What we're seeing more and more now is organisations start to really understand the influence and the power of the platform. Hari talked about, you know, higher market sell, but what organisations are doing, and Dell's a great example in the playbook, is where they educated their staff to actually understand why they felt it was important for their employees to have a profile. And yes, we respect that it's your profile, it's not ours, but if you're going to talk about Dell, here's the key words we'd like you to talk about it, and here's how you can use your own status updates within your own networks to start to help us and be an extension of our recruitment team, actually become ambassadors. And then ultimately, we've talked about the measure and adjust, and the Insights guys talked a lot about that, and once again, Sarah was able to talk about the impact their talent brand has had, and the other factors around that, whether it be the followers or be the actual traffic that's getting generated from that activity, whether it be their jobs or their actual status updates, on how engaged the members are within the platform. And so ultimately those statistics, that data, help reinforce and strategize and influence the business to understand the impact talent acquisition is having on the business. And that's really where it becomes transformational, because all of a sudden, when you go right back to the model we talked about at the start, from a traditional base to moving towards a strategic, it's how do you use that data to help elevate the perception of talent acquisition, to help them understand that you are talent acquisition experts and that you are at the forefront of change to help the organisation achieve their goals competitively and create competitive advantage through acquiring quality talent. So with that, I would like to thank Sarah for her time and sharing. As I said, the playbook is in everyone's handbook, so please take the time to look, and there's also the ability to download. But we have 1 more minute, I'm told, so if there is anyone who has a question, the panel had 1 question, I'd like to get 2, just because I'm competitive.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It's also been, Tim, a real pleasure to hear you guys speak this afternoon. Rob Salisbury, SRI here in Singapore. Sarah, you mentioned, let me see, the growth. Let me say 25,000 to 150,000 followers in 18 months. That's been because of the job, I think, job stuff you put online. Could you just explain that a little bit better? You covered it quickly, which is great, but could you just explain, that's a lot, that's 600% increase in 18 months. So I think a few of us might be interested in how you did that.
It's quite astounding, actually.
Thank you.
So I suppose the point being is that, you know, a lot of people come to LinkedIn, or it's a passive audience, but they're interested in what you have to offer. And we started to build excitement, explaining kind of who we are as a company and what we offer, you know, as an employer. And we started to see growth in our follower numbers. But it was when we loaded up our jobs, the current vacancies, that the follower numbers really shot up. And I think that's in part because, you know, once you load your jobs and people start clicking, it starts to go out in the jobs you may be interested in, and those feeds, and it starts to build from there. So I think it was just, you know, that social piece. The jobs start to go out and people start to get involved. They start sharing them in their network. Their friends start to see it. They come back, and it just took off. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.